Hello. In this video, we will be looking at how CF standard names are used and how to find the appropriate name when you are writing your own metadata, and also how to specify units of measure in CF. First, let's recall that a CF standard name is used to unambiguously identify the geophysical quantity represented by the values inside an etcdf data variable. For example, quantities such as air temperature, cloud fraction, or sea ice thickness could all be identified using a standard name. A standard name is associated with the data variable simply by specifying the standard name attribute and assigning it a value. In the example here, we have some CDL code for a single netcdf data variable called PSL. It's a two-dimensional array of floating point values with latitude and longitude coordinates, and it has two additional CF attributes, units and standard name. And as we shall see, these two attributes go hand in hand throughout the CF conventions. The value of the standard name for this variable is pressure at mean sea level, and it's string valued, so it appears in double quotes. The units are hectopascals, abbreviated by the symbol HPA, and again written in double quotes because the units attribute is also string valued. Now, the CF conventions don't require that data producers include a standard name attribute for every variable, but doing so is very helpful to data users, and so it is a recommended practice. The CF standard name is particularly important when comparing variables from different data sources, such as climate models and instrument observations. If two variables from different sources are labelled with the same standard name, it means they can be compared in a scientifically meaningful way. Now, a question that quite often comes up from users is, can I use the same standard name more than once within a netcdf file? And the answer is yes. The same standard name can be used multiple times because it's not being used as a unique identifier for a data variable. Rather, it's telling us how to interpret the values inside the variable. So in this example, we have two variables, each containing data for time series of wind speed values. The variables are distinguished using their names, WSA and WSB, and no doubt they will have different latitude and longitude coordinates, but they both have the same standard name of wind speed. And this is perfectly valid CF metadata. It's important to understand that strings used for CF standard names must be chosen from a list published on the CF website, known as the CF standard name table. Updated versions of the table are published periodically. The most recent contains upwards of 4,500 entries. The link in this slide can be used to see the latest version of the table. We know it's the latest because it contains this word current, and that saves us having to remember a particular version number. And even when a new version of the table is published, that link will still take you to the latest one. So we will be looking at the published table later on in this video, but before we do that, let's zoom in on a couple of examples to illustrate what information we might find there. Firstly, there is the standard name itself. CF standard names consist of letters, digits and underscores, and they contain no white space. They are written in the English language with US spellings, and they are case sensitive. Now, if we click on the entry for a name in the standard name table, it opens up some descriptive text, giving some more explanation. The descriptions aren't intended to give a full textbook definition of fundamental quantities such as temperature, but they do explain the words and phrases used to construct the standard name. So in the first example here, the word anomaly is described as a difference from climatology. Any CF standard name containing the word anomaly would also have this piece of text in its description. And this ensures that terminology is used consistently throughout the standard name table. The descriptive text never appears in the metadata inside a netcdf file, but the standard name table can be used to look up the meaning of a variable if it has been labelled with a standard name attribute. The third piece of information in the standard name table is called the canonical unit. And this is usually, although not always, an SI unit of measure. The canonical unit is best thought of as specifying the physical dimensions of the named quantity in terms of mass, length, time, and so on. And it must be physically consistent with the quantity described by the standard name. Now, a question that's quite often asked by new users is, what should I do if the units of my data don't exactly match the canonical unit in the standard name table? Well, the good news is that although the units we specify in our data file must be physically consistent with the canonical unit, it doesn't have to be identical. And this is because software implementations of the CF conventions utilize the Unidata UDUnits2 package to convert between physically equivalent units. So let's look at an example using temperature units, as this one frequently crops up in user questions. So the entry for air temperature in the standard name table tells us that the canonical unit is Kelvin, and the symbol for that is K. Now, if it so happens that our temperature data are measured in Kelvin, we can simply use the standard name and specify the unit's attribute to be the same as the canonical unit, as shown in this example, and that's perfectly valid CF metadata. But what if our data are measured in degrees Celsius? One approach would be to convert all the data values to Kelvin, write them to our file, and then write our metadata in the same way as shown here. But there is another way. So the UDUnits package contains the information needed for conversion between Celsius and Kelvin, so it's fine to choose the standard name air temperature and assign degrees Celsius to the unit's attribute. A data user can always then use UDUnits2 to convert the data back again to the canonical unit if they wish to do so. So again, this is valid metadata. But now, suppose in our file we chose the standard name of air temperature and then specified the units as meters per second. Well, UDUnits doesn't know how to convert from meters per second back to the canonical unit of Kelvin. It's not physically consistent. So this is an error. So now we've introduced the concepts inside the standard name table. We've looked at how we might use the standard name and units CF attributes. So let's go now to the CF website and have a look at the standard name table itself. So this is the homepage of the CF website. And if we look along the menu bar at the top, there is a link to a dedicated standard names page, which you can use to see earlier versions of the standard names table, see it in different formats, and learn about other lists of terms used in CF. So do check out that link if you're interested to learn more. But for now, let's stick to just looking at the latest version of the standard name table in an HTML format because that's the easiest to browse. And actually the quickest way of navigating to that is to go from the home page and choose the right hand of these three links here. That will take us straight to the latest version of the standard name table. And the table lists all 4,500 plus names in alphabetical order. So starting here with this acoustic signal name and going all the way down to zenith angle, which is our last entry. So if you really want, you can just use the scroll bar and browse all the way through the full list of names. But there are some quicker ways of finding names if you're looking for a particular term. So let's look at how we might do that. So there is a search box built in at the top of the page, and we can simply type some text in there. And we can switch between these and or radio buttons to search either for all the terms we enter or to find standard names with at least one of the terms we enter. So, for example, we can look for all the names that mention sea ice. Let's do that. I've checked and. We just click Search Standard Names, And very quickly it comes back and tells us that we've got 96 standard names matching that query for sea ice. So we can scroll down that list. If we click on an individual name, we see its description, and to the right we see the canonical units column. If we just clear that search, which we can always clear just by using show all standard names, that resets the page. There are also some preset searches at the top. So if I'm particularly interested in finding names in a particular science area, I could choose one of these, which simply pre-populates the search box and does the search. And in this instance, I found 47 standard names associated with oceanography. So that can also be a shortcut. Now sometimes when we're doing a search, it doesn't always turn up what we expect. For example, if I type in the word volcano and search standard names, it tells me it's found 0 matches. But I happen to know that we do have some relevant standard names. And so I'm going to shorten my search term slightly. Instead of typing volcano, I'm just going to say volcan and search standard names. And now it's told me there are 10 matches, and they are actually for volcanic ash names. So a useful approach, if you're looking for a particular word that you would expect to find in standard names, is to think about whether it might occur in slightly different forms with different endings, and just search for part of the word. That can be very handy. Another useful thing to know about with the search is that we can also search the help text, which means it will look at both the standard names and their descriptions. And this can be useful if a particular quantity is also commonly referred to in the literature by another name or by an acronym. So that won't necessarily have been used for the CF standard name, but it may be referenced in the description. For example, meteorologists are very fond of a particular term called precipitable water content. I can enter that. If I search just for standard names, it won't find it. But if I click on help text, it will find 12 matches with that sort of text inside it. Now I would have to look at the descriptions to try and find which is the most appropriate name to use for the quantity I'm interested in. But at least now we've found some possible matches. And one other question that does come up with the standard name table is that people ask whether they can search on units. Now, there isn't actually a built-in search for units in the page itself, but we can get around that by using the browser's own built-in search function. And on most browsers, the keyboard shortcut for that is Control F. So if I do that, you see I get a search box here. So this is just provided by my browser. And now I can use that to search on units. So for example, if I look for something like moles per kilogram, it tells me I've got 9 searches. And although it won't pick out a list of standard names for me with those units, what I can do is just use the up and down arrows to move from one instance to the next and see which names they correspond to. So that can also be a useful way of doing it. And so that concludes now our brief introduction to standard names and the units in CF metadata. I hope you found the video useful, and thank you for listening.